Oscar Wilde, the tragic genius of wit and beauty. Oscar Wilde, 1854 to 1900, was an Irish writer, playwright, and poet known for his dazzling wit, flamboyant personality, and sharp social criticism. His works, particularly The Picture of Dorian Gray and The Importance of Being Earnest, remain some of the most celebrated literary achievements in the English language. Early life and education. Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde was born on October 16, 1854 in Dublin, Ireland, into a family of remarkable intellect and social standing. His father, Sir William Wilde, was a highly respected surgeon and an expert in ophthalmology and otology. He was also an amateur archaeologist and a writer, contributing to Irish folklore and medical literature. His mother, Jane Francesca Wilde, was an equally fascinating figure, a poet, feminist, and political activist who wrote under the pseudonym Speranza. She was known for her passionate support of the Irish nationalist movement, and her poetry inspired many Irish revolutionaries. Growing up in this intellectually stimulating household, Wilde was exposed to literature, art, and politics from an early age. His mother frequently hosted literary salons, where poets, writers, and political thinkers gathered to discuss the pressing issues of the time. This environment played a crucial role in shaping Wilde's love for literature and debate. Wilde's early education began at the Portora Royal School in Enniskillen, Northern Ireland, where he studied from 1864 to 1871. Known for his sharp intellect and love of classical studies, he excelled in Greek and Latin. Even as a teenager, he displayed a remarkable wit and a tendency to challenge conventional thinking. His passion for literature, particularly the works of Greek and Roman writers, was evident in his academic performance, and he won numerous prizes for his essays and translations. In 1871, Wilde earned a scholarship to Trinity College, Dublin, where he studied classics. Under the mentorship of John Pentland Mahaffy, a respected scholar of Greek antiquity, Wilde developed an even deeper appreciation for classical art, philosophy, and literature. He became particularly interested in the concept of Hellenism, which emphasized beauty, individualism, and aesthetic pleasure, ideas that would later influence his literary philosophy. Wilde's exceptional performance at Trinity earned him the prestigious Berkeley Gold Medal, the highest academic award in the school's classics department. His success led him to Magdalen College, Oxford, in 1874, where he continued his classical studies. At Oxford, Wilde embraced the aesthetic movement, which promoted art for art's sake. He was influenced by figures such as Walter Pater and John Ruskin, who argued for the importance of beauty in life and art. Wilde's unique style, flamboyant dress, and sharp wit quickly made him a well-known figure in intellectual and social circles. Oxford was a defining period for Wilde, as it solidified his artistic philosophy and transformed him into the charismatic, brilliant thinker who would later captivate the literary world. Literary career and rise to fame. After completing his studies at Oxford, Oscar Wilde moved to London, determined to make a name for himself in the literary world. His flamboyant personality, sharp wit, and aesthetic philosophy quickly made him a well-known figure in artistic and social circles. Initially, he gained attention more for his persona than his writings, but he soon began producing works that would establish his legacy as one of the greatest writers of the 19th century. In 1881, Wilde published his first collection, Poems, which received mixed reviews but demonstrated his talent for language and lyrical expression. Around this time, he embarked on an extensive lecture tour in the United States, 1882, where he delivered talks on aesthetics and the importance of beauty in art and life. His famous declaration upon arriving in America, "I have nothing to declare except my genius," captivated audiences and cemented his reputation as a master of wit. Wilde's breakthrough as a writer came in the 1890s. His only novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray, 1890, was initially published as a shorter version in Lippincott's monthly magazine. The story, which explores themes of beauty, morality, and corruption, caused controversy for its perceived decadence and homoerotic undertones. Critics attacked the book as immoral, but Wilde responded with characteristic wit, adding a preface that defended the role of art as separate from morality. Despite its initial reception, Dorian Gray is now considered a masterpiece of Gothic literature. However, it was in the theater that Wilde found his greatest success. His plays, blending sharp satire with elegant dialogue, became instant hits. Lady Windermere's Fan, 1892, established him as a leading playwright, followed by A Woman of No Importance, 1893, and An Ideal Husband, 1895. These plays exposed the hypocrisy and superficiality of Victorian high society while delivering brilliantly comedic and thought-provoking narratives. Wilde's most celebrated work, The Importance of Being Earnest, 1895, premiered in London to widespread acclaim. A masterclass in wit and absurdity, the play remains one of the most frequently performed comedies in English literature. At the height of his fame, Wilde was admired as the literary darling of London. His works not only entertained, but also challenged the rigid morals of Victorian society. Unfortunately, just as his career reached its peak, personal scandal would soon lead to his dramatic downfall. Scandal and downfall. At the height of his fame, Oscar Wilde was one of the most celebrated writers in London. His plays were hugely successful, his wit was adored by the aristocracy, and he was known for his flamboyant personality. However, beneath the glittering surface of his success, a storm was brewing, one that would ultimately destroy his career, reputation, and personal life. Wilde's relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas, often called Bosie, was the catalyst for his downfall. Douglas was a young, aristocratic poet with a rebellious streak, and the two shared a passionate yet tumultuous relationship. Their affair, conducted in an era when homosexuality was criminalized in Britain, was an open secret in literary and artistic circles. Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, strongly disapproved of his son's involvement with Wilde. Known for his aggressive and confrontational nature, Queensberry sought to publicly disgrace Wilde. In February 1895, Queensberry left a calling card at Wilde's club, the Albemarle, which read, "To Oscar Wilde, posing as a sodomite, a misspelled version of sodomite." Enraged, and against the advice of his friends, Wilde sued Queensberry for libel. This decision would prove to be disastrous. Queensberry hired private investigators who gathered evidence of Wilde's homosexual relationships. During the trial, these details were exposed, and when Queensberry was acquitted, Wilde found himself in serious legal trouble. Almost immediately, he was arrested and charged with gross indecency under the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885. Wilde's first trial in April 1895 ended with a hung jury, but the second trial, held in May, found him guilty. The prosecution painted Wilde as a corrupting influence on young men, using passages from the Picture of Dorian Gray and Wilde's letters to Douglas as evidence of immorality. Wilde's wit, once his greatest asset, became his downfall as his ironic remarks were used against him in court. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor, the maximum punishment for his crime. The imprisonment was brutal. Wilde, accustomed to luxury and admiration, suffered tremendously under the harsh conditions. He was subjected to backbreaking labor, poor nutrition, and severe isolation. The once celebrated playwright was now a broken man, abandoned by many of his former friends. His health deteriorated, and he was deeply scarred by the experience. Upon his release in 1897, Wilde was a shadow of his former self. Humiliated and penniless, he fled to France, where he lived under the pseudonym Sebastian Melmoth. He never returned to England, and despite his literary brilliance, he would never regain the success or status he once enjoyed. Final years and death. After his release from prison in 1897, Oscar Wilde was a broken man. Once the darling of London society, he was now an outcast, abandoned by many former friends and stripped of his wealth, dignity, and health. He fled to France, living under the alias Sebastian Melmoth, a name inspired by Saint Sebastian and the protagonist of Melmoth the Wanderer. His wife, Constance Lloyd, had changed her surname and taken their 2 sons to Switzerland, forbidding them from seeing their disgraced father. Wilde's only solace came from a few loyal friends and his continued, though strained, Relationship with Lord Alfred Douglas. In exile, Wilde's financial situation was dire. His works were no longer widely read, and he depended on the charity of friends like Robert Ross, his devoted companion and literary executor. Despite his hardships, he still possessed his famous wit, remarking, "I am dying beyond my means." During this time, he wrote the Ballad of Reading Gaol, 1898, a haunting poem about the brutal conditions of prison life and the execution of a fellow inmate. The work was well received, but it did little to restore his fortunes. Wilde's health deteriorated rapidly, weakened by the effects of prison, malnutrition, and heavy drinking. By 1900, he was suffering from meningitis, likely exacerbated by an ear infection left untreated. As he lay on his deathbed in a Paris hotel, he quipped about the ugly wallpaper, saying, "Either that wallpaper goes, or I do." On November 30th, 1900, at the age of 46, he passed away. Before his death, he was received into the Catholic Church, a faith he had long admired. He was buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, where his tomb, designed by Jacob Epstein, remains a site of literary pilgrimage. Legacy. Oscar Wilde's legacy endures as one of literature's most brilliant and tragic figures. His sharp wit, social criticism, and mastery of language continue to influence writers, playwrights, and thinkers worldwide. The Picture of Dorian Gray remains a cornerstone of Gothic fiction, while The Importance of Being Earnest is regarded as one of the greatest comedies in English literature. Wilde's fearless defiance of Victorian morality made him a martyr for artistic and personal freedom. Today, he is celebrated as an LGBTQ+ icon and a champion of individuality. His words, immortal in literature, remind us of the power of beauty, wit, and truth.